Welcome to this How to Do Voter Registration training presented in May of 2023 by the League of Women Voters of Athens County. My name is Adrienne Molenkamp, and I'm glad you're joining us to learn more about how to conduct voter registration. Today, we're going to talk about who can vote, how to do voter registration, how to check somebody's voter registration status, review voting options, and how to do absentee ballots, as well as resources and tips. This training session is going to cover a lot of topics. We're going to go into detail about how to do voter registration, and we're going to touch on a lot of the other topics. One of the purposes is just to make sure you have some basic information so that if you have questions in the future, or you need to follow up on specifics, you could know where to go and look for that information. So who can vote in Ohio? You must be a US citizen. You have to be a resident of Ohio for at least 30 days before the election. You must be 18 years old on election day and not currently serving time for a felony conviction. So anybody who has a felony conviction but is not currently incarcerated can vote. So how do we do voter registration? In the league, we do lots of different methods. We might have a table set up at an event or walk around an event, talking to people. Sometimes we go door to door. We want to make sure that we're being nonpartisan in all of the work that we do and registering anybody and answering any questions. And it's important to remember that you cannot give anything in exchange for somebody registering to vote. This is illegal. Even something like giving them a postage stamp to put on the voter registration form is illegal. You may have incentives. So if we have a voter registration table, we might have a bowl of candy on the table. But you can only do that if that candy is available to anybody who walks by, whether or not they register to vote, whether or not they talk to you. As long as it is available to everybody, you can have it as part of your event. It's important to be able to look up somebody's voter registration status when you're doing voter registration events so that you can check to see if they're already registered. Maybe they don't remember what address they're at. We're going to go at the end of this presentation and look at the actual websites to do that. But this is the link if anybody needs it. All right, so here is the voter registration form. And just a reminder that the voter registration deadline is always 30 days before the election in which people want to vote. As you look at the voter registration form, it starts with the very first line that is not numbered. Are they registering as a new voter? Are they updating an address or updating a name? This line is not required, but if the voter can fill it out as accurately as possible, it helps the Board of Elections to process their paperwork faster. And then you go on to two questions about their eligibility, verifying that one, they are a US citizen, and that two, they will be 18 on the next election day. These people tend to skip, so it's really important to make sure people fill out those checkboxes. As you go along, the next set of questions is personal information. Line 3 is name. Line 4 is house number and street. So this is a physical street address, 31 Main Street. It cannot be a PO box or any other thing that is not a physical location of their address. This is how the Board of Elections will determine which districts the voter is in, and that's why that physical address is so important. 5 is city, 6 is zip code. 7 is a additional mailing address if the voter has any. This is where somebody might put in a PO box or a different mailing address that they use that is separate from their physical location. And then number 8 is county. This tends to get mixed up and people think it says country, but it really is county. 9 is their date of birth. And then 10 is their identification line. You can use one of 2 different kinds of identification. It can be a state ID number, so a driver's license number or a state ID card number. If the voter has one of those, either a driver's license, and that can be any kind of driver's license, motorcycle, regular, whatever, or if they have a state ID card, that is the preferred number to put in that line. If the voter does not have one of those ID cards or does not have access to that ID number, then they can use the last 4 digits of their social security number. And finally, line 11 says phone number, and it says this is voluntary. And that is true as far as completing the form. However, I strongly recommend that all voters put their phone number in here, because if the Board of Elections has any questions about the voter registration form, it gives them a quick way to contact the voter and get it sorted out. This could be if the Board of Elections is having trouble reading the form or something doesn't match up, like they put country instead of county and nobody caught it, this will let the Board of Elections contact the voter and get it fixed quickly. The last couple of questions, number 12 is if a voter is updating their address, they will have already entered their new address. And in here on line 12 is their old address. That helps the Board of Elections to keep the files accurate and up to date. If the voter does not remember that, that part can be left blank, but it's preferred that they enter that. And that's one way that you as a volunteer can help them by checking that for them. 13 is a former name if they're changing their name. So this is, again, the new information would have been up top, and 13 is the old information. And then 14 has 2 parts. It has today's date and the signature. And the signature needs to go in the side of that identified box. So just to review some common errors, things that people tend to leave blank are those citizenship and age questions at the beginning. They forget to put in an identification number, and then they forget to date and sign, or they just do one or the other, but not both. And then things that people tend to get mixed up is, again, the county, listing the county, not the country, making sure the birth date is in the correct place and today's date is in the correct place. Making sure they've got that physical voting address and that the form is filled out legibly so that the Board of Elections staff can read that. And so you as a volunteer helping them fill out this form can help them avoid these errors in a couple of ways. One is that, you can hand them the form, maybe explain it a little bit, let them fill it out, and they'll hand it back to you. And before they walk away, ask them, say, wait a minute, let me check for any problems while you're still here. And then you go line by line through the form and make sure everything is filled out correctly. Sometimes, depending on the situation and the physical space, I may stand right next to the person who's filling out the form and go line by line with them. Say, okay, here on this line, you put your name, here's your last name, your first name goes here. Here's where you put your address, and just walk them through one at a time. The last thing is that volunteers can fill out the form for somebody if they have that person's permission, and as long as you don't sign it for them. But you can fill out all the other information, so you can ask them, okay, what's your name? And they'll spell it for you and you write it in on the correct lines. Once it's all filled out, you give it back to them to review, and they sign the signature box at the bottom. A couple of special situations that may come up when you're registering people. People who are transient or unhoused can register at an address that will accept mail on their behalf and that they intend to return to. So that could be a homeless shelter, a local community organization. It could be a friend or a family member. These individuals may have more problems with the ID requirements that are needed on election day, because you have to have a driver's license or a state ID card. So you may want to advise them about their options for absentee voting, which does not need those ID cards. They can vote with an absentee ballot using their date of birth and the last 4 digits of their social security number. Although, of course, if they're voting by absentee ballot, they do need to be able to receive the ballot by mail and return it either in person or again by mail. Registering college students. College students can choose whether they wish to register at their campus address or at another permanent address that they have, typically a parent's address. For them to think about when they're trying to figure out what they want to do, what ID do they have available, so that they know whether they're going to be able to vote in person or whether they're going to need to do absentee balloting. Where are they actually going to be during election time, election day? Are they going to be in the place they want to vote on election day? If not, are they going to be able to do absentee balloting? Are they going to have mail access? Things like that. And especially making sure if they are updating their address, if they have moved in the last year, which is very common. Some things to know is that the address on their driver's license does not need to match their campus address, and they can still register at the campus address. And again, anybody who does not have those ID cards can register with their social security number and then vote absentee ballot by mail using the last 4 digits of their social security number. Sometimes people will ask, and the act of registering to vote in Ohio will not impact federal financial aid, their driver's license, even if it's out of state. However, it is important to know that if they were to get an Ohio ID card, that would void their driver's license or ID card from another state, and it's possible that it could affect their financial aid, maybe their federal financial aid. So we do not recommend that out-of-state students get an Ohio ID card. For out-of-state students, we recommend that they can still consider whether they want to register and vote in their campus address or their home address, but then they should look at their options for voting by mail. All right, so you've been helping people fill out these paper registration forms, and they've given you the paper registration forms back. Now you need to do something with them, which is that you need to return them to the Board of Elections office either within 10 days after the form is completed or by the voter registration deadline. So if I'm registering voters and somebody fills out a form on September 10th and turns it back to me, I have to turn that into the Board of Elections office by September 20th. Now, if somebody gives me a form on October 5th and the voter registration deadline is October 7th, I have to get that into the Board of Elections office by October 7th. Sometimes for league activities, you may be asked to return those forms to a central location, and then another volunteer will drop them all off at the Board of Elections office. When a voter registers, they will receive confirmation from the Board of Election within 20 days after the form is entered. They will send by mail a voter registration card, which is going to list the precinct, the polling location, ID requirements, and things like that. If people are not sure if they've received that or not sure if they are registered, they can always check their status online at voteohio.gov, and we'll review that a little bit at the end. Ohio does have an online voter registration option. Again, it can be accessed through voteohio.gov. If somebody wants to register online, they have to have both an ID card, so again, the driver's license or a state ID card, and they have to use the last 4 digits of their social security number. They need both of those. And so since that process is a little bit longer, we don't generally do that as part of our voter registration events. We find it simpler to use the paper forms. We should all be aware that the state of Ohio, as everywhere, does voter roll maintenance to make sure they are removing people from the rolls if they've moved out of state, things like that. But Ohio also has a system of voter purges for where they can remove voters who have not been active. And so those voters should get notification by postcard and have time to update or be active so that they're not removed. But sometimes people don't get those. Sometimes there are errors in those purge lists. And so it's best practice for everybody to make sure that their voter registration is up to date. So even if you're talking to people and they say they're already registered, it's always nice to offer to check their voter registration for them and make sure the address is up to date. Okay. So now somebody's actually registered to vote. We're going to talk a little bit about their options for how to vote. In Ohio, we have 3 options for voting. You can vote on election day at your polling location. It is open from 6:30 a.m. to 7:30 p.m. on election day, and you must show photo ID to vote. And we'll review those photo ID options in a minute. You can also vote early in person for the 4 weeks before the election. This generally happens at the Board of Elections office. Occasionally, there may be a different early vote center. Voters who vote early in person must show photo ID. And we always recommend that you check the current days and times that are available for early voting. And finally, you can vote by mail, also called absentee voting. To vote by mail, you can again use your ID cards, but you can also use the last 4 digits of your social security number as your identification. And we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail. Just some reminders about special voting situation. Military and overseas voters have special voting requirements and rules. And we always recommend that they check those directly. And we urge everybody to get their ballot and return their ballot early. Hospitalized voters, if somebody is hospitalized, particularly unexpectedly, they can contact the Board of Elections office up until 3 p.m. on election day and ask that somebody come and bring a ballot to them at the hospital so that they can be allowed to vote. People who are currently incarcerated on a felony conviction cannot vote, but all others in jail can vote. And if somebody has been released from serving for a felony, they are eligible to vote again. However, they must re-register. When they were incarcerated, their voter registration was deactivated, and so they must re-register. All right, so photo IDs that are acceptable for voting. An unexpired Ohio driver's license. And again, that can be any kind of driver's license, a commercial, a motorcycle, a temporary, an interim. So, if you're in the middle of getting a new one and you have the temporary ones, those are fine. You can use an unexpired suspended driver's license, but you may not use any expired licenses. State of Ohio issued ID card. These are identification cards that are issued by the Bureau of Motor Vehicles. Those are the only kinds of state ID cards that are allowed. So ID cards from other state organizations are not acceptable. This has to be a Bureau of Motor Vehicles issued state ID card. A US military ID card, an Ohio issued National Guard ID card, a US issued Department of Veteran Affairs ID card, or an unexpired US passport or passport card. For all of these IDs, the address on the ID does not need to match the voter's registration address. And there's a change that county veteran ID cards are no longer acceptable. Ohioans who do not currently have a driver's license are eligible for a free Ohio ID card. To get those ID cards, you do require proof of identity, such as a birth certificate. And so people should make sure they contact or look up the Bureau of Motor Vehicle rules for getting those ID cards and make sure they have all of the proper documentation with them before they go get those ID cards. Again, just a reminder that out-of-state students should not get one of these free ID cards because that can disrupt other identification materials and possibly affect their financial aid. So those students can vote by mail using their Social Security number. It's also an option for them to vote in person using a passport. I'm guessing most students don't have their passport on them. Just a reminder that under the new rules, non-citizens will have that label on their ID cards. If they become a US citizen, they are also eligible for a free card that removes that non-citizen label. We're going to talk about this a little bit more at the end, but there is a new organization called Vote Riders in Ohio that will help people get ID cards. All right, so voting by mail, voting by absentee ballot is going to be a good option for more voters. And so we want to make sure people know how that process works. The first thing that you have to do is request an absentee ballot. To do that, you must use the official absentee ballot application form. It's available online at the Board of Elections office from local libraries. You must return that absentee ballot application form to the Board of Elections no later than 7 days before the election. However, we recommend that you do it much earlier than that. In fact, as soon as you know you want to vote by absentee ballot, you should fill that out and submit it, because the Board of Elections office has to receive it from you. They have to process it. They have to turn around and mail your ballot, and all of that takes time. So you're gonna, if you get it in by the deadline, it's going to be quite a tight turnaround to get your ballot to you. You can return those absentee ballot forms either in person at the Board of Elections office or by mail, and it is acceptable to return those for another person. So when we have voter registration events, we often have the absentee ballot forms also. We can have people fill out all of those forms at once, or just the ones they need, and we can drop all of them off at the Board of Elections. This is what the absentee ballot application form looks like. I'm not going to go through it in detail. It is fairly similar to the information on the voter registration form. And they've kind of highlighted all the parts that you need to make sure you fill out. I will note in here that number 2 is your contact information, which is optional, but again, highly recommend that you fill in your phone number and your email address, because that gives the Board of Elections a quick way to contact you if there are any problems with your application. All right. Once a voter receives their absentee ballot, the actual ballot, what do they do? So you want to fill out everything that's in there according to the directions. So you're going to have your actual ballot form where you mark your votes. You are going to have a security envelope, which is where you put all your identifying information. You want to read the directions carefully and put all of the information there. That's going to be your name, your address, and then your ID information. So either a driver's license number or the last 4 digits of your social security number. All of that goes on that form, which you also sign. You're going to seal that envelope with the ballot inside. That whole envelope goes in an outer envelope that you seal. And then you have to return it to the Board of Elections office. You can return it in person. You can put it in the drop box or take it into the office, and it has to be received by 7:30 p.m. on Election Day. There are rules about who can return somebody's absentee ballot. So you can obviously return your own, and then a small selection of close relatives can also return somebody's ballot. So spouse, a child, a parent, and there's some other ones. So if you're having considering having anybody else drop off a ballot, we recommend going on to voteohio.gov and check those requirements specifically and make sure the person is legally allowed to return your ballot. You can also mail your absentee ballot back in. Those ballots must be postmarked by the day before the election and then arrive at the Board of Elections office by 4 days after the election. So, a couple of things. We highly recommend that you take that ballot to the post office and request that they postmark it in front of you. Ballots are in special envelopes. The post office is supposed to postmark them, but you seeing that they have done so helps make sure that that has happened. The voter must pay for postage. It's usually 1 stamp per page, and your ballot instructions will tell you exactly how much postage you need. And make sure you mail them in as early as possible. So if you mail it in at the last minute, which is the day before the election day, it has to arrive by the 4th day after the election. We know the mail's been slow recently, and so we strongly urge voters that are mailing them to return them much earlier than that, as soon as they can. Throughout this process, you can track your absentee ballot on voteohio.gov. You can see when your absentee ballot request has been received. You can see the date that your ballot is sent to you. You can see the date that the Board of Elections received your ballot. So if you've sent it back in, you can check in there and make sure they've received it. And if they haven't received it, you can follow up with the Board of Elections office. And some counties may have additional tracking options. A word about provisional ballots. So provisional ballots would be cast on Election Day. And if there is any question about whether a voter is eligible to vote, they'll be asked to cast a provisional ballot. This might happen if a registered voter comes to the polls but does not have the correct ID. Once a provisional ballot has been cast, it has to be verified that it is eligible to be counted. So oftentimes the voter will be given instructions for something that they have to do. And so in the previous example, if they didn't have their ID with them at the polling location, then they have to take their ID into the Board of Elections office and show it there. Sometimes, depending on the situation, there may not be something that the voter has to do. It may just be internal verification from the Board of Elections office. But either way, the voter will receive written instructions about how they need to follow up on their provisional ballot. Voters should make sure they have that with them when they leave and that they understand them. It's going to give them contact information. the really important thing to remember is that the deadline to fix those issues that have made you cast a provisional ballot, that's called curing your ballot, is 4 days after the election. So people have to very quickly get that ID back to the Board of Elections or provide them whatever information they need. All right, some resources. The first is vote411.org, which is the League's nonpartisan candidate and issue information. So if you go on Vote 411, there's always general information about the voting rules in each state, links to register to vote. And then as we get closer to the election, there will be candidate and issue information. You'll put in your address, and if there's a local league in your area, you will find any information that they have entered. Here in Athens County, we make sure that all races and issues are in Vote 411, so people can look up everything that they'll see on their ballot. And then if we have any voter guide questions that we've asked candidates, those will appear there. We use voter information palm cards that we give out to all voters. And so that has a reminder about voter IDs, where to get information about different programs and things. You can also find sample ballots on the Vote Ohio website, and we'll show you a little bit of that in a minute. I mentioned earlier that Vote Riders is it's a national organization. They're new to Ohio, and they help people get IDs in order to vote. So they can help walk people through the process of how to get an ID card. They can help them do the work of obtaining the documents that they might need, such as a birth certificate, and they can help cover some of the costs of getting those materials. And they are at voterider.org. Election Protection is a nonpartisan toll-free hotline for voting information. They have information in various languages. And while you can call the line anytime and somebody will get back to you, one of the big things is that this is staffed on election day and some of the voting time up to election day. So that if you have any problems, if you try to go to your polling location and they tell you you're not registered or you have to cast a provisional ballot and you're not sure what's happening, you can always call Election Protection at 866-OUR-VOTE, and they will either help explain what's going on or help you fix it or something like that. So sometimes if there's a problem, the Election Protection staff can immediately help to work to fix that problem, maybe contacting your local Board of Elections to get it fixed or something like that. Sometimes they might explain things to you. They might tell you, yes, go cast your your provisional ballot like they just asked you, and we will help you get it sorted out so that it's counted, something like that. All right, some tips when you're doing voter registration. Of course, be friendly and outgoing. Start with a question, and we have found that asking, have you checked your voter registration lately, is a better question than are you registered to vote? Because if you say, are you registered to vote? People say yes and walk on. But if you say, have you checked your voter registration lately? Sometimes you have more of an interaction with people. Of course, make sure we're being nonpartisan. And remember that the work we're doing is important, even if we don't get paper forms. So, sometimes you'll go to an event and you register one voter, which can sometimes not feel great, but you've actually talked to 50 people that day. And so some research has shown that the best way to encourage people to vote is to regularly talk about voting. So the more that we're out encountering people talking about voting, the better, even if we're not actually getting those forms. And finally, remember, you don't have to have all the answers. You can look things up. You can tell a voter how to look things up. Sometimes if there's specific questions, sometimes we'll call the Board of Elections office with the voter standing there and try to figure it out. So we can always make sure that we're getting people further information, even if we don't have the answers. All right, and lastly, let me show you voteohio.gov. So this is the voteohio.gov, Secretary of State's website for Ohio. And the first part up here is going to have like the most relevant things for what's going on right at the moment. So right now we're kind of between elections, so it has a lot of voter registration information up here. During the election, you'll see quick links to early voting or polling locations or things like that. And then down here at the bottom, we always have all the links. So you can come here and go directly to the sorts of information you're looking for. I wanted to show you two specific things while we're here. First is how to look up a voter registration. So from this site, you can click on the look up your voter registration. You'll get sent to a place that asks for your name and then county. And so, you know, if you're working with somebody and they're not sure if they're registered at a new address or an old address, you can check different counties and then answer the security questions. There we go. And here we get me. There's my name. There's my address that I'm registered at, so I can see if that's up to date. If I want to click on that, I can find out more details about myself, where my polling location is, that sort of thing. The other thing that I wanted to show you is how to get a sample ballot, because that's also going to show you some more information that is available here. And so sometimes they have, during the elections, they'll have the link for the sample ballot, but since it's not up right now, I just searched for it. And so it's the first option that comes up. So here we start by picking the county. We'll pick Athens, and then I do my name. And this is a part of what I wanted to show you, is that going this way brings you to a different kind of more detailed set of information. So here's my name, my address, here's my precinct and polling location, and then I can get all sorts of information here. So when there is an election, you can get sample ballots. Right now, there's not going to be anything if I pick that. I can print an absentee ballot request form. So this kind of fills in some of my information and it makes like an official form that I can print. So this is also a good way. If you want to track your absentee ballot, that option is here. So there's lots of good information on this site. So I think that is everything. Thank you for joining this training today. I hope that you got a lot of good information to be able to go out and help register voters. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me or to the League. Thank you and have a good day.